Hi, I'm Brian Freeman, and I'm the author of Alter Ego. You are watching Author's Voice.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Author's Voice, where we are connecting authors to the world. I'm your host, Libby Hellman, and this is Solved. I'm the author of 15 compulsively female-driven thrillers, which I hope you'll check out sometime. But today, I'm talking to Brian Freeman, who is one of my favorite authors. His new book, Alter Ego, is just a terrific story, which you really have to read if you haven't already. It's published by Quercus. It's $26.99, and we want to thank Quercus for helping us with getting books and making Brian available to us. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, which I hope you are, please use the comments and you can ask a question, anything you want to know from Brian. Include your name and where you're from, and we'll make sure that we can get that question to Brian almost immediately. Most importantly, though, we hope you're going to want to order a book right now, which you can do. Brian will be signing them, so it'll be a signed author copy. All you have to do is if you're on Facebook, just click on the authorsvoice.net link, and that'll take you directly to where you need to be to order a book. And if you're not on Facebook or just watching this afterwards, go to authorsvoice.net and you can order a book after the fact. Welcome.
Thank you.
Housekeeping's out of the way.
Perfect. Well, it's fun to be here.
Thank you. It's wonderful that you came. I'm just delighted. So I'm going to read you, for those of you, maybe the one or two of you in the world that don't know Brian's work, I'm going to read you a little bit about him, and then we'll get into our talk. Okay?
Sounds good.
Brian writes psychological thrillers that have been sold in 46 countries and translated into 22 languages. His novel Spilled Blood won the award for Best Hardcover Novel in the annual Thriller Awards, and his novel The Burying Place was a finalist for the same. Other winners of this award have included Lisa Gardner, John Sanford, and Stephen King. The drama in Brian's books is driven by the emotions and secrets of his characters. The twists and turns keep you turning the pages, and each piece in the puzzle gives you new insight into the heroes, the villains, and the victims. Brian doesn't like books where all the characters are good or bad, he says. I want them to live in the real world, where morality means tough choices and a lot of shades of gray. And he says he hopes that's why readers relate so intensely to the people in his books. He's lived in Minnesota for more than 35 years with his wife, Marcia, who is his partner in life and in the book business. They both stay closely connected to Brian's readers. This is Brian's 17th book, his 15th thriller, and his 10th thriller in the Jonathan Stride series. So I think I got it right.
I think you got it perfectly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So my first question is, you write psychological thrillers, you say.
Right.
But they're really police procedurals. Why did you shift?
It's kind of a fine line. I mean, there's obviously a lot of investigations going on in the books, and yet I very deliberately don't focus on the sort of forensic minutia of procedurals. I really focus on the characters and the questions being asked. In a lot of cases, I'm going outside the perspective of the actual police work and going inside the heads of the other characters. So that's why I think of them really as more psychological puzzles than kind of traditional procedurals.
But you did do research into correct procedure,
Sure.
And you still do, I would imagine,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Well, that's one of the nice things is the more books you write, the more you have readers with expertise in different areas who are very gracious about offering their help along the way. When I did my book, Goodbye to the Dead, which was 2 Jonathan Stride novels ago, that one is one of the few books of mine that features sort of a whole court sequence in there. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, one of my big fans is the county attorney for Isanti County in Minnesota, and he was very gracious about talking me through the process, giving me trial transcripts of felony trials that he'd done, reading an early draft of the book to kind of make sure that I did the legal stuff right. So those are the kinds of things that help make sure that you've got the details correct.
Well, last time we talked was on the radio, and that was when Goodbye to the Dead
Yes.
came out. And you said, and I'm going to quote you on this, I'm not trying to play games with the reader. We were talking about unreliable narrators,
Right,
and the
yes.
surfeit of girl titles, girl.
Yeah,
with
yes,
this.
yes.
You don't have a gimmick, and yet your stories are compulsive reads. They're really hard to put down. A review of Alter Ego said they feel like family about your characters. And Michael Connelly said, this guy can tell a story. So how do you make that happen?
That's a great question. I really like the idea of the characters feeling like family to the readers, because they feel like family to me as well. I mean, I'm very intimately connected to those folks. I mean, that's true whether you're talking about Jonathan Stride and his partners Serena and Maggie, who have been in my life for 15 years, or the new series Frost Easton that I set in San Francisco that just started last year. I mean, these characters kind of worm your way into your heart. But the thing is, I'll often have readers asking, how do you keep track of the facts, and do you keep sort of an encyclopedia of details about each of the characters so you make sure you get that right? And I very deliberately don't do that. I probably should, but I frankly would rather make a little mistake about some detail in their lives than feel like I've reduced the characters to a two-dimensional list of facts on a page. Right. I want them to feel real. I want them to be kind of coming to life on the page. For me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I often go back to a prior book and say, did she do that? Did he do that? I can't remember.
And
I have to reread the book, and then I see all the errors that I made.
Exactly. Well, but fortunately, readers are always very nice about pointing that out.
Okay, let's talk about Alter Ego. Tell us the premise.
Well, I've been thinking about the plot line for Alter Ego for a few years now, and it revolves around the idea that there is this movie being made on location in Duluth based on one of Jonathan Stride's older cases, which I figure would be a nice little nudge to the film agents out there. And so Stride has to deal with his alter ego, this Hollywood icon who is playing him in the film. And not surprisingly, this celebrity has some dark secrets that perhaps he does not want exposed. And what was amazing to me as I wrote the book last year, I turned in the book in early September, and not 2 weeks after I turned in the manuscript, the whole Harvey Weinstein saga broke open in the press. So I had my editor on the phone saying, wait, did you know something? So
That's funny. Well, it turned out to be very timely
it
for you.
feels ripped from the headlines now, exactly.
Yeah. Now, you do something in Alter Ego. You bring in one of your characters from your other series, your Cab Bolton series.
Yes.
Now, were you thinking of that? You knew you were going to bring them together at some point, and you knew this was going to be the book?
It actually was fairly late in the game that I decided to do that. When I was thinking through the original plot line of Alter Ego, I honestly had thought of it originally as a Cab Bolton novel because Cab has Hollywood connections through his mother Tarla, and so I'd been thinking, well, maybe this would be something.
How'd you come up with the name of Tarla?
Tarla, honestly, I have no idea where that particular name came from, but Tarla Bolton just sounded like a Hollywood actress. So I'd been thinking originally of this as a Cab novel, and then the more I thought about it, the more I thought that actually it seemed to fit into Stride's world, and it would give me the opportunity particularly to bring in some of the other characters in the Stride series, like Kat, the teenage girl that lives with him and Serena, and make her a very fundamental part of the plot. But as I was kind of putting this all on paper, I thought to myself, well, since it started out as a Cab book, and since Cab's mother does have the Hollywood connections, maybe this would give me the natural way to sort of bridge these series and do something readers have been asking about for years, which is see if I could bring Stride and Cab together in one book.
Mm-hmm. It worked out.
It does.
Really nicely.
I had always been a little nervous about it because I thought, well, they're very different characters. These are stories, series with very different storylines, and yet this one just sort of bridges the two in a nice way.
When did you figure out that Maggie would be the vehicle for bringing them together?
Readers have asked about this idea of the crossover for a while now, and I've always said, well, I don't know if it would work, but if there's one character that would sort of bridge these series, it's Maggie, because Maggie has the same kind of rather snarky, sarcastic outlook on life that Cab does, and so those two would fit like peas in a pod.
Let's go back just for a second for people who don't know the relationship between Stride and Serena and Maggie and Kat. Just Just
Yes.
just give us.
Absolutely. Well, the sort of the triangle that has been in place in the Stride novels all the way since the beginning is Stride and Serena and Maggie. Serena is a detective from Las Vegas that came into Stride's life in the very first book, Immoral, and Maggie is Stride's longtime partner who has sort of nursed a crush on Stride for years and years and years, and it always made for a little bit of a tense triangle among them, and there were some fissures in that relationship that broke open a few books ago in the burying place. But they've kind of got their act together a little bit now. Stride and Serena are actually married as of the book Marathon, and Maggie is still struggling with her love life and never quite seems to find the right person. And then Kat Mateo is this teenage girl who...
When did she show up?
It was The Cold Nowhere.
Okay.
She appears in the prologue of The Cold Nowhere, and Stride actually comes home and finds this teenage girl hiding in his bedroom closet, soaking wet and saying that someone is trying to kill her. And I deliberately wanted to bring this young girl into Stride's life because I thought, I didn't think Stride and Serena would ever have kids of their own, but I thought it would be interesting to see how sort of a parental relationship would change their lives. And Kat has become one of my favorite characters in the series and really a big favorite for readers as well.
She was a hero in this book.
Absolutely.
Wow. The courage.
Yeah. She's this wonderful combination of courage and foolhardiness. So, I mean, she's a teenage girl. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she sort of has, an attitude. She's way beyond her years in some ways,
right.
And then a teenage girl
right, exactly.
in other ways. You have said that Stride lives in a bitter place.
Yes.
Tell us what you mean by that and a little bit about Stride.
Sure. Well, I do feel a little bad for the readers in Minnesota because we just came off this interminable winter, and now here they open up Alter Ego and I put them right back in January again.
I noticed that, by the way.
Yes. But I do have a couple scenes down in sort of the hot sunshine of Naples, Florida, just to give you a little bit of a break. Well, Duluth is a wonderful locale for suspense novels. It's got this great combination of scenic elements. I like to set a lot of my scenes outside, and there's just no way around it. The weather in Minnesota in January is pretty bitter, and it's a big part of the people's lives at that time of year. And so I like the idea of folding that into the novels and showcasing how weather changes things in terms of the plot lines, just the way it changes the lives of Minnesotans day to day. And Stride himself, he fits into the Northland kind of hand in glove. I mean, he's known a lot of loss in his life. He's struggled to get past that. He's a northern Minnesota guy. He faces challenges and he kind of tucks his chin against the wind and keeps moving on. So.
Were you reminded? I was reminded when I was reading about the film crew and everything of Anatomy of a Murder, which was filmed up not in Duluth, but on Lake Superior I forget. Anyway. But I just wondered if that ever crossed your mind.
It didn't actually. It didn't.
Okay.
But I was kind of thinking through what the dynamics would be like filming in a place like Duluth. I've always been a little suspicious that there are producers out there in Malibu, reading through the Stride novels and going, so we'd be filming in Duluth in January. Yeah, I don't know about that.
But it was kind of like a film within a film because the film is about Stride.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I just love the irony of that. And of course, one of the things about Duluth is that it's big enough that you can imagine some dark things happening there, and yet it's small enough that you always kind of feel like you're bumping into your past. And that's something that comes up again and again in the Stride novels, is the past has a way of coming back to haunt you, which in this case it certainly does for Stride, because this old case that is seemingly long settled that they're making the film about suddenly begins to come back to life in the course of the book.
Stride is surrounded by strong women, Cindy's, then Serena, Maggie, and now Kat. What did you need to learn about writing women?
Well, I've been married for 34 years, so that helps a lot. So, I love writing the women characters.
Yeah, you've said you like them more than writing male characters.
Yeah, I do. it makes for me, it makes for an interesting creative challenge getting inside the heads of women characters. You know, I'm a man, so I suppose I think that way, and creatively it's not as much of a challenge for me to sort of drop into the heads of the male characters. But for me as a writer, I enjoy the sort of the more profound challenges of understanding how someone who's actually different from me thinks, and getting those characters right on the page.
When you're in their point of view, do you do your description or your narrative differently, what they might see in a scene versus what Stride might see in a scene?
Yeah, I do. You know, I'm always a big believer that that we are all products of the people that we've met and the experiences that we've had, and that shapes who we are. And that if you understand what someone has gone through in their lives, you can sort of predict what they're going to say and how they're going to behave in certain circumstances. And that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm actually trying to take myself out of the equation and let the character speak directly to the reader. One of the most meaningful emails that I've received from a reader was after my second book, Stripped, came out. And there is a scene in Stripped where Serena is dealing with the mother of a child who has lost this child in what seems to be an accident. And I got an email from a reader who was asking if Marcia and I had ever lost a child, because he and his wife had, and he said that scene captured the emotions that a parent goes through in that circumstance so well that he felt we had to have experienced it ourselves. And of course I was able to say, you know, fortunately, no, we hadn't gone through that, and in fact, Marcia and I don't have kids. But those are the kinds, that kind of email is sort of the highest praise you can get as a writer, because it means it's not you on the page, it really is that character speaking directly to the reader's heart.
Absolutely. By the way, if you're watching us on Facebook, feel free to type in a comment or a question for Brian, and we will make sure that it gets to him right away. You had mentioned, while we're on the subject of POV, I think you had mentioned when we talked before that the hardest part was to write the POV of a young woman. Were you experimenting with Kat then? Or?
Yeah, that was back when I was trying to get inside Kat's head and make that feel authentic. Although actually it was an earlier book where I first dealt with that, because Spilled Blood, which won the Thriller Award, that book has a number of scenes set from the perspective of teenagers in the book. And one of the things I felt best about was the number of emails I got from teenage readers and from their parents who said that I kind of nailed the perspective of the teenagers.
What was it? What was it that you emphasized on the young people?
You know, I think it's that combination of being on the cusp of adulthood and yet not having the maturity and experience to sort of understand the consequences of what you're doing. So, and Kat is very much in that circumstance as well. She sort of ends up rushing in where angels fear to tread with good intentions and with a good heart, but not necessarily being able to see far enough down the road to figure out how that might affect people.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Cab, since he's in the book,
Yes.
and what kind of a guy he is. I have to tell you, I've not read your Cab Boltons. I've just read the Strides. And at first I wondered if he was like going to turn out to be a bad guy, because he was so Florida, so, you know, cool and casual.
He is. He's kind of the anti-Stride. I mean, Cab is.
But he has this as finely tuned sense of justice as Stride does.
Just in a different way. Exactly.
So tell us about Cab and how you came up with him.
Cab first appeared in my book, The Bone House, and that was actually the first non-Stride novel that I published. And Cab was really a supporting character in The Bone House. He wasn't the center of the book, and in fact, I never intended The Bone House to be the first in another series. But after The Bone House came out, I had so many readers writing and saying, well, are we going to get more Cab? That I decided to write a whole nother Cab novel, and that turned out to be Season of Fear. And Season of Fear is based completely down in Central Florida. And you know, Cab, I just love spending time with him. I mean, he's 6'6", kind of has this spiky blonde hair. He's always wearing a suit despite the Florida humidity, and he's got this touch of glamour about him because of his mother, and he's got money because of her as well. So he does this because he enjoys it, not because he needs to. So he takes the world seriously, but he doesn't take himself seriously at all, and I love that about him as a character.
Mm-hmm. We do have a question. It's from Margaret in Philadelphia. Hi, Margaret. And she asks, are the crimes you write about that happen in the Northland unique from other kinds of crimes? How is a Duluth murder different than a New York murder?
Oh, what a good question. That's one of the things that's true of my novels is they're really not urban crime thrillers. I mean,
No, they're not.
Duluth is really kind of a small town pretending to be a city, and I think of its character as much more small town based, and so it's not it doesn't feature the kind of urban crimes that you might get in a big city thriller, and so many of my scenes try to take advantage of the natural setting up in Duluth, so it's tends not to be sort of in the heart of the city. I like to use the farmlands and the wilderness and the lake and sort of the natural surroundings of Duluth. That's where I like to set my books.
Mm-hmm. So how much time do you spend up there? Do you go up there regularly to discover other new parts of the city that you might not have known about?
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to give my readers a you are there feel with the books, that you're dropped down into the middle of every scene and you can hear it and touch it and taste it and smell it and feel it happening all around you. And for me, I do that by scouting locations kind of the way a film director would. So Marcia and I are out on scouting expeditions around Duluth, and when I outline a book, I usually leave the locations open so that I can go and find just the right setting somewhere around the Northland that enriches the drama of what's going on between the characters.
Interesting. But they're all taken from real
They're
reality.
all real places, exactly.
Yeah. Why did you start writing in the first place? Let's go back and talk a little bit about you. You talk about having a teacher in 8th grade who kind of gave you a pass and said, don't listen in class, just go ahead and write.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people that writing books has been my lifelong dream. I first started in on a mystery novel all the way back in 6th grade. So this has just been what I've wanted to do forever.
You had parents that fostered a love of reading.
I had parents who fostered a love of reading. I was just a voracious reader from a very, very young age. And and my grandmother was a huge mystery fan. She'd always she'd always tell me, oh, I'm reading this great new book. It's got lots of bodies in it. So this was the genre I was bound to write in. And yeah, I had this great 8th grade composition teacher, and she kind of freed me up from the lesson plans because she knew I already had been writing for so many years. She really wasn't going to teach me anything about composition. She just wanted me to be able to sit there and write my stories. And the summer after her class, I started in on a first novel and spent 18 months finishing that. And from that point forward in life, boy, that was what I was going to do. I was going to write books. So.
Well, tell us how you first got published. Was it the first novel that you wrote? Was it the second, third?
It was actually the 6th.
Oh my God!
It was the 6th I'd written. Now, admittedly, this goes back to when I was 13, and a couple of those books were written on Bic pen and binder paper, So. But yeah, no, I
never give up.
Exactly.
Yeah,
no, I mean, and there were a lot of days where I was thinking, gosh, why am I banging my head against the door of this tough, crazy business? But I just felt like writing books was what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And I started in on a 6th book that turned into the book Immoral, which is the first Jonathan Stride novel. And you hope things are going to be different on the business side, but you don't know. But I've always been a big believer that things happen for a reason and they happen in the time frame that they're supposed to. And right around the time that I had the manuscript of Immoral, kind of the way I wanted it to be, I found out that one of the folks in the company I was working with, completely by accident, he was going to be going to a college alumni event with a woman who was an agent at one of London's largest literary agencies. And so he was gracious enough to agree to make an introduction, and the agent was drunk enough to say, yes, I'll read your book. And so she read the book. Fell in love with it, wrote back a week later, said, I stayed up until 1 a.m. finishing it. I've already called a UK publisher to say, this guy's the next Harlan Coben. I want to represent you. Call me immediately. Wow. And
so you started with a UK
I did, yeah, I did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
unusual.
It was very unusual, yeah. And so she teamed up with a U.S. agent, and they went out and sold the book in the U.S. and UK. And then Bookspan, which at the time owned book clubs all over the world, they chose Immoral as their international book of the month. And so Immoral became the main selection in the Literary Guild and the Book of the Month Club. And by the time the dust had settled, we'd sold the rights to Immoral in 17 languages.
No
and
kidding.
so after 20 years of getting nowhere and 5 books still sitting in my nightstand drawer, we were on the way in this amazing, amazing ride.
Yeah.
So.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
you're still on the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
So what is the hardest part of writing for you? And what's the easiest?
Oh, good question. I think people sort of assume that the more books you write, the easier it gets. And I don't know how you experience it, but I find every
little laugh.
Yes, every book is enormously difficult. I mean, I had thought that I had some difficult jobs in my life before I broke through as a writer. And,
what were you
oh,
doing?
I had a sort of rogues gallery of different jobs. The most glamorous was being director of marketing for a corporate law firm. I mean, it doesn't get more glamorous than that. So, doing public relations for lawyers,
Oh boy, oh boy.
So, but I think writing books is far and away the hardest thing I've ever done. Each one is extraordinarily difficult.
What part of the writing process is the toughest for you?
For me, it's because they're psychological thrillers and they're very emotional. There's very intimate connections with the characters. You really every single day have to dig down into some dark places in yourself and pull out these stories and these characters and let them tell their stories on the page. And sometimes some dark things are going to be happening to them, and sometimes you're dealing with dark people, and those are places that it's not always comfortable to go, and it's very emotional to go. I mean, I'll write scenes where I've got tears just running down my face because I get so connected to who these people are and what they're going through. But I always figure if I can get that invested in these characters, then hopefully the readers will too.
Are you an outliner, or do you just write as 4 or 5 chapters ahead of where the reader is?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot over time. The early books, I was sort of a fanatical outliner. I would be very, very detailed with every outline. And I think that's probably as I was kind of gaining my confidence as a writer in the early books and feeling like I needed to really have that pretty detailed blueprint for where I was going. As I've gone along, I've changed my methodology a lot, and I still do an outline, but really it's more of a roadmap. It kind of gives me a general path from A to Z, and then as I'm going through the book, I'm constantly massaging the suspense and changing things around to sort of enrich the drama for the readers, recognizing that I kind of know where I'm going, I know where I want to end up, but I'm developing it more spontaneously as I go.
And what's the part that you enjoy the most about writing?
The part I enjoy the most about writing, well, I think it's still the opportunity to hold that book in my hands when it's published. I don't know if you're familiar with a British writer from days gone by named Brian Freemantle. But he did a lot of books back, particularly back in the 1970s, and I was one of those guys. I would go into B. Dalton when I was a teenager, and I'd find a Brian Freemantle book on the shelf, and I'd hold it up, and I'd put my thumb over the TLE. So I'd say, "That's what it's going to look like when it's my book." So
Did you really?
I did. I really did.
Did you read his books?
Honestly, I never did. I feel a little guilty. I've gotten some Brian Freemantle readers over the years who thought they were buying a Brian Freemantle book and then realized it was mine and wrote to say, "Oh, I loved your book."
Funny. That's funny. How long does it? Are you doing 2 books a year now?
I am at this point. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has that changed your process at all? How is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank heavens I'm doing this much later on. I now have a process that I feel pretty comfortable with, and I know what goes into creating a book. It doesn't make the book any easier, but I know what I need to do in the time frame in which I need to do it, and so it has made at least a manageable process to be able to do 2 books a year. And fortunately, I mean, Marcia has taken over so much of the business side and event planning and all the things that go on behind the scenes that frees me up to do more of the writing. If she weren't doing that, I don't know how I could do 2 a year.
So. Do you look for a challenge in each book that you write, something that you haven't done before, or some character? So how does doing 2 books a year work with that? I mean, do you sometimes say, well, I can't think of anything new, and so I'll just go back? I don't know.
The good thing is doing a couple different series, it means I have different characters and different settings and different storylines. That means there's always something out there to be told. So I've got this mature series with Jonathan Stride, and now I have a pretty new series with Frost Easton in San Francisco.
I was gonna ask you about that.
And so The Nightbird was the first in the Frost Easton series last year, and now The Voice Inside is the second book, just came out in January.
The The Nightbird was one of the top 20 Kindle bestsellers of
2017.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Yeah, we had an
pretty
amazing
great.
run with that
Now,
book. Yeah.
obviously you have to go out to San Francisco, right?
Yeah, the research trips are a little better than Duluth in January. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Naples, San Francisco,
Yeah, well,
not bad.
we did Naples when it was July and about 100 degrees. And
Oh, not a good time.
Not a good time.
Not
yeah.
a good time. Okay. Okay, this is just a minor thing, but I noticed there's not a lot of cursing in your books. Is that intentional?
That's a fascinating question, because if you go back to my earlier books, you'll find a lot more of that. People who've read the more recent books and then have gone back to read Immoral and Stripped and Stalked will write to me and say, "Oh, you naughty boy! There's a lot more swearing in those earlier books."
Did you get complaints?
Every now and then I will get readers
Yeah.
that get upset about that. I mean, I've gotten older, and I heard from enough readers that really appreciated the fact that I had sort of taken that out of the books, that I realized that that's something that readers pay attention to, and I have been a lot more conscious of that now in the past 4 or 5 books. In fact, I deliberately went through in Marathon and Goodbye to the Dead to try to dial that back.
Really?
And it was a deliberate creative choice on my part, and it doesn't mean that it won't come up from time to time, but I'm very judicious about where I choose to put it in, and I don't know, maybe I've become a little bit more sensitized to the idea that I'll watch movie thrillers, and it seems like every other word in the dialogue is the F word, and it's like it's just unnecessary. So I've sort of come to the idea that what, it really isn't necessary, and so I've deliberately tried to pull that back.
Yeah,
So.
well, I noticed.
Yeah,
I did notice, as someone who has, puts it in like a sailor. So anyway, okay, one more thing we have to talk about before we leave you, and that is that I'll bet you guys didn't know that Brian Freeman writes chick lit. You have had 2 novels.
I have, yes.
And
yes.
if you take a look at his Amazon page, you'll actually see the pen and ink kind of cover on one of them with the high heels.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How did you come to write chick lit?
Well, I mentioned my agent in London, who was Allie Gunn, and just this wonderful force of nature. And quite a few years ago, almost a decade ago now, she came to me and said, I've always wanted to write a book set in the wild and woolly London publishing industry, but she wasn't a writer, and she was like, "Would you be interested in writing a book like that?" And I'm always up for a creative challenge. So I said, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I developed a plot line and wrote the book and teamed up with Allie on that. We released it as The Agency. The author's name was Allie O'Brien, having a little fun with both of our names. And we had a great run with The Agency. We got a wonderful review in People magazine for it. And it's nothing like my thrillers. It's got a female first-person narrator set in London and New York. And it was a hoot to write, and I hope it's a hoot to read. And then very, very tragically, not long after The Agency came out, Allie passed away very tragically and unexpectedly, 45 years old, and died in her sleep. And I had to really kind of think about, did I want to do something else in that genre without her around? But I had what I thought was a wonderful plot idea and a wonderful character, and so I wrote a follow-up book called West 57. And there was no Allie, so I couldn't use Allie O'Brien anymore, so I put it under B.N. Freeman. But I love them both. And West 57, honestly, it's one of my favorite novels of what I've written. It's probably in some strange way closer to who I am as a person than any of my thrillers,
Really?
because it's sweeter and sentimental and funny. It was a fun book to write and read.
You
So.
heard it here, folks. You can go from hard-boiled detective to chick lit and stick with the same author. Brian, this has been really fun.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and we are coming to the end of our time, so I just want to let you know that today is a big day for Author's Voice. There are going to be 2 more shows this afternoon. The first one is going to be a new show called Novel Conversations, where Dan Weinberg is going to interview Congressman Steve Israel from New York about his latest novel, Big Guns. That'll be at 3:30 p.m. Central Time. And then at 5:30 Central Time, A House Divided Richard Quest will discuss I Held Lincoln with Bjorn Skaptesen. You can still ask a question and order your signed copy at authorsvoice.net. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the broadcast, you can still order a signed book. Just go to the link underneath the title that you'll see on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll be back very soon with another edition of Solved.